Walk into a modern American supermarket and you find thousands of identical packaged products. Every box on those brightly lit shelves represents the ultimate triumph of the industrial food system. We have traded regional uniqueness for the convenience of global supply chains and chemical preservatives. But just 2 centuries ago, a completely different culinary ecosystem thrived in North America. Before the 20th century, this massive geological wall isolated millions of settlers from the coast. The treacherous terrain created a vast inland island where commercial trade was practically impossible. Winter storms could trap families in deep hollows for 6 consecutive months with absolutely no outside aid. Survival demanded an incredibly specialized diet that modern industrial agriculture deliberately erased. Today, the government classifies large portions of this mountain range as severe food deserts. Grocery stores are scarce, and residents rely heavily on processed foods shipped from distant factories. This stark contrast reveals a deliberate historical shift designed to replace self-reliance with consumerism. The mountains held a completely independent food culture that most people will never get the chance to taste. The rich heritage of zero-waste preservation and hyper-local foraging was paved over by coal mining towns. To understand how an entire regional cuisine was systematically dismantled, we must look at its origins. We need to examine exactly how human beings survived the brutal winters of the 18th century frontier. That unique cultural collision birthed an ingenious system of survival outside of industrial supply lines. The story begins with the massive Scots-Irish migration into the mountains during the 1700s. They found a landscape filled with dense forests, rapid rivers, and terrifyingly steep limestone ridges. European pioneers abandoned their failing wheat fields and fully embraced this indigenous botanical science. Families had absolutely no access to mechanical refrigeration or imported spices to mask spoiled provisions.
Hold steady, boy. We're almost there.
Commercial salt was a rare luxury because pack mules could barely navigate the treacherous mountain passes. The settlers had to invent preservation methods that relied entirely on ambient climate and raw chemistry. They constructed incredibly specific structures designed to manipulate temperature and humidity year-round. This architectural ingenuity merged with chemical biology to create a fascinating natural pantry system. Every family transformed their humble log cabin into a highly efficient, multi-level food processing plant. They mastered the art of dehydration, relying on wood smoke and mountain wind to pull moisture from food. The resulting techniques birthed iconic flavor profiles that modern chemical additives simply cannot replicate. These methods turned highly perishable summer crops into indestructible staples that could last for decades. These heavy strings of fresh beans hung directly from the rafters above the open hearth of the cabin fire. The constant heat and swirling hickory smoke slowly dehydrated the pods until they felt like stiff leather. When winter snows buried the region, cooks tossed the dry shucky beans into boiling pots of pork broth. The reconstituted beans provided essential winter vitamins while delivering an incredibly rich, smoky flavor. But vegetable preservation was completely overshadowed by the complex science of curing Appalachian pork. Hogs roamed free in the forests all autumn, fattening themselves entirely on wild chestnuts and fallen acorns. The sudden drop in temperature in late November signaled the critical community event known as hog killing time. Families rubbed raw hams with heavy layers of local salt, brown sugar, and sometimes sharp black pepper. The dense salt drew out moisture while lowering the water activity to a point where bacteria could not survive. The smoke acted as a powerful antimicrobial barrier that completely sealed the exterior of the precious meat. A properly cured country ham could hang safely in ambient mountain temperatures for up to 3 full years. This dry curing process concentrated the savory pork flavor into a sharp, deeply complex culinary masterpiece. While smokehouses preserved meat, dairy required an entirely different approach, utilizing natural topography. Settlers purposefully built small stone structures directly over cold, running mountain streams in the valleys. These springhouses functioned as natural refrigerators, maintaining a constant temperature near 50 degrees. Crockery filled with fresh milk and churned butter sat right in the flowing water to prevent rapid souring. This brilliant utilization of natural hydrology ensured families had vital fats during the hot summer months. Yet cultivated crops and preserved livestock could not provide all the necessary nutrients for isolated survival. The mountains themselves offered a hidden, hyper-local bounty that required deep botanical knowledge to unlock. Indigenous guides taught the new arrivals exactly how to identify edible wild plants hidden in the dense canopy. Foraging was not a casual hobby, but an absolute biological necessity to prevent scurvy after the long winter. The most anticipated wild edible was the ramp, a highly pungent wild mountain leek that appears every April. Ramps possess an aggressively strong flavor profile that sits somewhere between raw garlic and sharp onion. They only grow in specific high-elevation shaded soils for a fleeting window of just 3 to 4 weeks. This specific wild allium flatly refuses commercial domestication and cannot be grown in a standard greenhouse. Because ramps defied industrial farming, they remained an exclusive delicacy, isolated to the high ridges. Another untamed treasure is the pawpaw, recognized as the largest native fruit growing in North America. Hidden in the humid river valleys, the pawpaw tastes like a bizarre cross between a mango and a ripe banana. This exotic tropical flavor seems completely out of place in the temperate forests of the eastern woodlands. But the delicate green skin of the pawpaw bruises instantly upon harvest, making transportation impossible. Within 3 days of being picked, the soft flesh ferments and rots, destroying any chance of retail sale. The modern supermarket logistics chain requires firm fruits that can sit on trucks for thousands of miles. Because the fragile pawpaw could not survive the journey to a distant city, industrial agriculture ignored it. The same fate befell wild morel mushrooms and the tart persimmons that dotted the dangerous mountain edges. These foods demand immediate consumption or careful local processing, anchoring the diet firmly to the geography. The inability to ship these ingredients meant they never influenced the broader culinary identity of the nation. They remained a fiercely guarded local secret, entirely disconnected from the growing capitalist food market. The isolated residents ate like royalty during harvest time, consuming flavors the wealthy elite could never buy. But true economic independence required more than just wild greens and carefully smoked country hams. A functioning society needs currency, and in the cash-poor mountains, specific calories became literal money. Cut off from coastal shipping routes, the high valleys had virtually no access to imported Caribbean cane sugar. To satisfy their need for sweeteners, farmers cultivated a tall, heat-resistant grass known as sweet sorghum. Every autumn, communities gathered for the grueling labor of feeding tough sorghum stalks through heavy iron rollers. Mules walked in endless circles, powering the crushing mills to extract the pale green, raw vegetable juice. The juice was channeled into massive copper pans over open wood fires and boiled for several consecutive hours. The intense heat transformed the raw liquid into a thick, dark amber syrup with a complex, earthy bitterness. Sorghum molasses became the definitive sweetener of the region, poured over cornbread and used in heavy cakes. But while molasses provided comfort, another liquid commodity provided actual financial power in the frontier. Transporting bulky raw corn over the rugged mountain passes via horse-drawn wagon was an economic nightmare. The cost of freight easily exceeded the market value of the heavy grain by the time it reached eastern cities. The ingenious solution was to distill that heavy corn crop into highly concentrated, easily transportable whiskey. A single-pack mule could carry 2 barrels of distilled spirits, representing acres of harvested cornfields. Clear corn whiskey became the accepted liquid currency, traded for taxes, medical care, and essential gunpowder. The federal government viewed this independent financial system as a threat and imposed steep taxes on spirits. This heavy taxation sparked the violent armed uprising known as the Whiskey Rebellion in 1791. The first president of the Republic personally led a federal army into the mountains to crush the local resistance. The rebellion was defeated, but the deep-seated cultural defiance against external regulation remained permanent. Distilling simply moved deeper into the hidden hollows, operating under the cover of night by moonlight. This economic friction perfectly highlights how the region constantly fought to maintain its self-sufficiency. The mountain people had built a completely closed-loop food system that needed absolutely nothing from outsiders. They possessed food security, valuable trade goods, and a rich culinary culture perfectly adapted to the terrain. So what powerful force managed to completely dismantle this resilient ecosystem in less than 50 years? The destruction of this ancestral diet did not happen by accident. It was engineered by industrial capitalism. In the late 19th century, powerful corporate syndicates discovered massive veins of bituminous coal in the hills. Wealthy urban speculators bought up vast tracts of timber and mining rights for mere pennies on the dollar. The deep forests that provided wild game and rare foraged plants were aggressively clear-cut for timber profits. Families who had farmed the ridges for generations were suddenly displaced, forced into corporate-owned coal camps. These brutal, isolated company towns completely severed the historical connection between the people and the land. Miners were deliberately barred from owning their own property or planting independent survival gardens. Instead of standard federal currency, laborers were paid in company scrip that only worked at specific locations. This artificial money could only be spent at the heavily monopolized establishment known as the company store. The company store deliberately stocked heavily processed, commercially canned goods imported by the rail cars. Nutritious stone-ground cornmeal was quickly replaced by highly refined, nutritionally bankrupt white flour. Fresh foraged ramps and wild berries were pushed aside for cheap canned vegetables loaded with heavy sodium. Sorghum molasses lost its dominance to refined white sugar shipped in from massive industrial processing plants. Within just 2 generations, a proud people forgot the essential survival skills of their pioneering ancestors. The vibrant, hyper-local diet of the mountains was replaced by a monotonous menu of processed corporate calories. This dietary shift triggered a catastrophic health crisis, introducing widespread diabetes and heart disease. Modern America looked at the resulting poverty and unfairly labeled the mountain cuisine as ignorant and backward. Television and media relentlessly mocked the region, erasing the memory of their complex agricultural achievements. The brilliant architecture of the spring house and the complex chemistry of the smokehouse were completely forgotten. Food conglomerates successfully convinced the nation that convenience was superior to absolute self-reliance. But biology is remarkably stubborn, and a few resilient seeds managed to survive the devastating corporate purge. Deep in the most isolated hollows, a handful of rebel farmers quietly refused to abandon their heritage crops. They recognized that modern monoculture was dangerously fragile and susceptible to rapid ecological collapse. Today, a dedicated network of botanists and chefs are frantically working to resurrect the Appalachian heirloom seed. Organizations like the Sustainable Mountain Agriculture Center are cataloging near-extinct varieties of shucky beans. They search ancient root cellars for forgotten glass jars containing the exact genetic code of the 8th century. A major victory of this preservation movement is the miraculous revival of specific ancestral corn varieties. Vibrant, crimson kernels of Jimmy Red corn and Bloody Butcher corn are finally returning to the mountain soil. These ancient grains pack a dense, earthy flavor that completely shames the watery taste of modern sweet corn. High-end chefs in major culinary capitals are suddenly paying premium prices for authentic sorghum molasses. Authentic salt-cured country hams are now recognized as artisanal delicacies on par with imported Italian pork. The culinary world is finally acknowledging the sheer genius required to build a food system from basic wood smoke. But this sudden mainstream validation cannot undo the systemic damage inflicted by a century of corporate mining. The vast majority of modern consumers will never taste the sharp bite of a wild ramp pulled from the damp earth. They will never experience the fragile, tropical sweetness of a perfectly ripe pawpaw hidden in the river canopy. The modern industrial food machine demands absolute uniformity, and the mountain diet refuses to be standardized. This specific regional cuisine was a perfectly calibrated biological response to an intensely harsh geography. It proves that true food security does not come from global supply chains, but from deep knowledge of local ecology. We traded a rugged, independent culinary ecosystem for rows of identical cardboard boxes under fluorescent lights. The next time you walk through a modern supermarket, ask yourself what other ancient flavors we blindly surrendered.